believe we deserve a spot in the 12-team playoff. To me, it's hard to. I get it. The committee has a really tough job. They have to choose the 12 best teams, but I get it. We got 3 losses. I understand that, but it's hard for me to sit there and say that we're not one of the 12 best teams in the country. When you look at our strength of schedule, when you look at our wins on the road, I think we're now 4-1 on the road this year in tough environments. We're not going and playing in front of 20,000 people on the road like some teams do in this country. We go into hostile environments every single week, and our only loss on the road is a 2-point loss. We talk about strength of schedule. I think today is our 4th top 25 win with, I believe, the 12th highest strength of schedule. So I get it. There's some very deserving teams out there. But if the committee's job is to pick the 12 best teams, you tell me. You tell me on Selection Sunday, everybody across the country, if South Carolina pops up in that bracket, I don't know of any team that would be excited about having to play this team the way that we're playing right now. That's what I judge it on.
All right. Welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb. Alan might be here, might not. He had to travel back from Clemson and everything yesterday, so we'll see on that. But either way, you're going to break down what happened in yesterday's 17-14 win with South Carolina at Clemson. Talk a little bit about playoff scenarios. Though before I even get into that, I just want to really emphasize, I know that we live in a world that's very on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. Take a moment to savor what happened yesterday. Take a moment to savor one of the best seasons in school history, with or without the way that everything shakes out from here, playoff wise, because a lot of that's kind of out of your control at this point. And yeah, there will be. If you don't make the playoffs, I do think that there'll be this forever look back at that LSU game, the way that you kind of got screwed by the refs in that one, and it'll be added to the chicken curse annals or whatever. But I think this team at this point has earned the right to just enjoy this win, and enjoy the fan base's respect on what they've accomplished this season, because it's really been insane. All right, let's talk a little bit about the game yesterday. Chris in on YouTube says, give us what we deserve. Yeah, we'll talk about that playoff here in a bit. And for what it's worth, not to bury the lead, I think South Carolina is one of the best 12 teams in the country, just like Beamer said right there at the top. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get in based on the criteria and all that stuff. All right, looking back at yesterday, I mean, heading into it, especially before we knew how the rest of the day was going to play out yesterday, it did feel like it had the potential to be a playoff playing game, which would have made it the biggest matchup in the history of the rivalry. Obviously, Clemson still has a road now after Miami lost yesterday, and they'll get to play in the ACC championship game. And with Auburn losing, meaning Alabama won, and Ole Miss winning, South Carolina's road's a little narrower. Still, I think, given the stakes as they were when you entered that game yesterday, pretty huge win. South Carolina's offense really struggled to get a lot going through most of the day. I mean, let's be honest, both offenses struggled a lot to get going throughout most of the day. The only touchdowns, there were 4 touchdowns between the two teams. All 4 touchdowns were accomplished by the quarterback running the ball and finding a way into the end zone. Obviously, LaNorris Sellers with the biggest run of the day, 20-yard run on 3rd and 15 to score the go-ahead touchdown. He finished with 16 attempts for 166 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns. He averaged over 10 yards a carry. He also added 13 for 21 and 164 yards passing and an interception, still a 62% completion percentage. And that actually made him the only Power 4 player this year to rush for 150 plus and pass for 150 plus in the same game. So pretty impressive. And to me, it was simply a matter of LaNorris Sellers was not going to let you lose that game, no matter how much adversity you have faced up until that point, which was quite a lot. So we talked on the podcast on Friday that you couldn't lose the turnover battle. Well, you did. You had 3 turnovers. Clemson only had 2. You had some in some of the worst spots. We talked about how you couldn't make the early season penalties that you had, and you did. Really in a lot of terrible spots. A couple different times where you were driving, you got a late hit or a bad false start. Actually, you got a false start right before LaNorris Sellers went on that scramble to turn a 3rd and 10 into 3rd and 15. Obviously, you overcame that one. But overall, you had 7 penalties for 66 yards. Clemson just had 3 for 15. So based on those 2 things alone, the cards were certainly stacked against you. But a lot of credit due to the defense on those 3 turnovers that South Carolina had. You ended up giving up 0 points off of those. And really, I mean, you only gave up a touchdown in the second quarter, which LaNorris Sellers immediately responded with South Carolina's own touchdown to tie it up, make it 7-7 at halftime. You gave up a touchdown right out of the break, and then Clemson was unable to score for the remaining 25 minutes of game time there after that first drive in the second half. It still looked like South Carolina was going to struggle to put enough together. For a long time, it seemed like 14-7, which Clemson had the lead on, would be enough. I guess a little bit of a shout out to the special teams too. You make a 42-yard field goal from Alex Herrera early in the fourth quarter, about 6 minutes or so left on the clock. You follow that up with a surprise onside kick. Talk again about defense and quick change. I thought the kick, I don't know about the call in that situation. I thought the kick was perfect, but you just miss being able to get it back. So Clemson gets the ball with a 14-10 lead, about 5 minutes or so left in the game. And you get a 3 and out from your defense in a spot where you absolutely had to have it. I mean, if they would have gotten 2 first downs, they could kick their own field goal. Instead, you get a 3 and out. You give LaNorris Sellers the ball back, and then that's when he leads the 9-play, 75-yard drive that ended up being the go-ahead score. Because it's the go-ahead score there, when Clemson drives down the field in the final minute, they get easily into field goal range. They were on like the 15 or 20 or so with about 18 seconds left. Well, if it's a tied game at that point, then Clemson can just kick the field goal, win the game, and it's over. Instead, they had enough time and timeouts that they wanted to take a couple shots. I understand Clemson fans being a little frustrated on the play that ended the game because it wasn't a shot to the end zone. It was a little dump off over the middle. Maybe you're trying to hit a crossing route and let him run for a bit. But either way, it gets tipped at the line of scrimmage, I believe, by Dylan Stewart. Demetrius Knight scoops it for an interception, and that ends the ball game. So very, very dramatic Palmetto Bowl win for the Gamecocks. A couple other things just to put the whole thing in context. The win yesterday gives Beamer the most wins in the first 4 years at South Carolina. He passed Spurrier. Spurrier had 28 wins in his first 4 years. Beamer now has 29. It also gave Beamer the most wins over a the most ranked wins by South Carolina head coach in their first 4 years. He now has 7 ranked wins, and 3 of those in the top 10. Lou Holtz was the previous one. He had 6 ranked wins, but only 1 of those in the top 10. Steve Spurrier had 5 ranked wins, only 1 of those in the top 10. So those 3 top 10 wins have been standing alone for a while, but he also passes up Lou Holtz for the most ranked wins in general in the first 4 years. He mentioned that LaNorris Sellers deserves some Heisman recognition after the game. I agree with him in the sense of you don't win that football game without LaNorris Sellers. You probably don't win the Missouri game without LaNorris Sellers. At this point, LaNorris Sellers is not only an incredible athlete, but he's proven that he has ice in his veins as far as these late game scenarios go. Even you go back to that road loss at Alabama, which we're going to have to talk a lot more about here in a second when we talk playoff scenarios. He led you down the field, hit Nick Harbor for a touchdown, and just wasn't able to finish the 2-point conversion there. So I think he showed pretty early on that he can make plays when the pressure is on. And then he's just gotten better and better with his confidence since then. And I was talking to Pauline this morning, who is our social media intern, and she takes photographs for us. And she said she got a photograph of LaNorris Sellers on that final run, and just mentioned the determination on his face, like he was not going to go down. On that note, according to PFF, he forced 18 broken tackles yesterday. 18 broken tackles on 16 runs. That's insane. He's averaging more than one broken tackle per run. And a couple of those, he went down early. So there's really multiple runs where he had multiple broken tackles, including that final run. I've watched about 100 times now. I don't know how many broke, 3, 4. Yeah, really, really, really insane. All right, let's take a step back now and kind of look at the playoff picture, because I'm sure that's what everyone is concerned about. To me, it's not looking as good as you hoped it would heading into the weekend. But your really big question, the biggest question, is going to be, can the committee put you ahead of Ole Miss and Alabama, who were 13th and 12th heading into this weekend? Sorry, 14th and 13th heading into this weekend, because you were 15th and you beat the number 12 team. Generally, you would think if you beat the team ahead of you, you would move up. Now, maybe it just is Clemson drops to 16, 17, whatever. All three of those teams shift up, but South Carolina doesn't jump any of them. And I actually think that that's probably the most likely scenario, unfortunately. But they could surprise us, right? Unfortunately, those early season losses to Alabama and Ole Miss head-to-head are an easy justification for the committee to put those teams over you, regardless of the fact that you have the same record, regardless of the fact that it seems, I think, like South Carolina is playing better than either of those teams at this point in the season. We cover this stuff every single week, right? We've been looking at this South Carolina team since deep into the offseason, since last spring, since whatever. And we can pretty easily see how they've grown and matured over the course of the season. I don't know that we expect the committee to actually have that sort of context. So when it comes down to metrics, when it comes down to their justification, it's going to be really hard for them to justify South Carolina over two teams that beat them head-to-head when they have the same record. That seems like the easy tiebreaker, I guess. Now, I think it's wrong. I think South Carolina is one of the top 12 teams in the country. But yeah, let's talk about how one of those three is likely to get in. So Miami lost yesterday, which probably drops them out. I know they only have 2 losses, but their strength of schedule is nowhere close to the 3 SEC teams. So assuming that does drop them out, now that they don't have a chance to play in the ACC championship game, you have SMU and Clemson in the ACC championship game. The winner of that is going to get an automatic bid. And maybe the loser of that should drop out of the top 12 as well. I think you probably want, for multiple reasons, you probably want SMU to beat Clemson because they're the lower ranked team. So they would definitely not get in with 3 losses. And SMU technically right now only has 1 loss. Does that sound right? I need to double check that real quick. I think they only have 1 loss. So it's college football playoff rankings. So they might not drop out even if they lost a close game in the ACC title game to Clemson. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. If that creates space, then you're right back in the scenario of, is it Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina? Again, don't hear what I'm not saying. I think that if I had a vote, I would put South Carolina in over Alabama, Ole Miss based on the way that the season has ended, right? You have Alabama and Ole Miss who both had a bad loss last week, just a week ago. And you have South Carolina who's now won 6 straight, was 5-0 in November, beat a ranked Texas A&M, beat Oklahoma at their place, which obviously Alabama showed us last week is not a given. Beat a ranked Clemson at their place, beat a ranked Missouri at home. So obviously down the stretch, I think South Carolina has the much better resume. You look at the quality of losses, which, that is what it is. Alabama lost to Vandy and Oklahoma, 2 unranked teams. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky and Auburn, 2 unranked teams. Meanwhile, South Carolina lost to Alabama and Ole Miss, who were ranked slightly ahead of them. Obviously went right to the wire with Alabama, and then lost to LSU, technically. And that is another thing that I think that the committee should consider, but I don't know that they actually will, is the way that LSU loss happened. The point that it was at in the season, I think if you lined up those two teams now 10 times, you would pick South Carolina, 8, 9 out of 10 times against LSU. And you go back and watch that, there is a moment late in the fourth quarter where Nick Emanwari picks off Garrett Nussmeier, returns at 100 yards for a touchdown, seemingly ending the game. It would have put South Carolina up 2 touchdowns with 5 minutes and something to go. Instead, they choose to call an egregious, unnecessary roughness penalty on Kyle Kennard because he blocked the quarterback that was pursuing Nick Emanwari. That was probably the worst of the calls, but go back and watch that game. There was 5 of those calls that you could have that could have flipped the game either way. Now, again, does the committee have all that context? Are they thinking back to a LSU game that was played in September, early October, whenever that was, and really digging into the details enough to jump Ole Miss and Alabama in the rankings? Or is it easier for them to just say Alabama, Ole Miss beat South Carolina head to head and wipe their hands clean of it? To me, that's what I think is going to happen. I don't think that's what should happen. I think with the full context, if you're trying to get the 12 best teams in college football in, South Carolina is one of those teams. I just have a really hard time seeing the committee do the right thing. I'd love to be surprised in that scenario. So I guess if you want to keep any hopes alive, next week in the championship games, you are rooting for it doesn't really matter what happens with Texas and Georgia. They're both going to be in either way. So root for whatever team you want to root for. Maybe you can make the argument if Georgia gets their 3rd loss in the championship game, but I really don't think that that's going to have any effect at all. Indiana, I think, is in no matter what. They picked up a win yesterday against Purdue. So now they're ending the season at 11-1. I don't think that they're probably one of the top 12 teams in the country right now, but they had a very easy schedule and they took care of business where they had to. And they're in the second best conference in the country, or I guess some would argue the first, but I wouldn't make that argument. An interesting thing to see, but I don't think it's actually going to matter, is where Ohio State falls after losing to Michigan yesterday. That puts them at 10-2 right now. They were in the number 2 slot heading into this week. They're not going to drop all the way out of the top 12. Could they drop to 7-8-ish? Maybe. And then if they lost again, well, they're not even going to get to lose again because they're not playing in the Big Ten championship game, because now Penn State will play in the Big Ten championship game since Ohio State lost. So I think Ohio State's in no matter what, too. Notre Dame doesn't have to play a conference championship game, which is BS. You guys all know how I feel about that. I think Miami has the best chance of dropping out. And again, you're rooting for SMU over Clemson, probably because SMU only has one loss. Clemson has 3. So that would drop Clemson out of contention. And I think you would only get one ACC team in that scenario, unless the committee just really likes Miami for some reason. I think that would be foolish of them. So yeah, really your only path is what I just laid out. You have to jump Alabama, Ole Miss. And I have a hard time seeing that happen. That's pretty much it. You're going to at most get 4 SEC teams in, it looks like, unless they really, really punish somebody for a conference championship game performance. And you have to be that 4th one. And right now, I think it's probably Alabama. And we know how the national media treats Alabama. And we know how the national perspective on Alabama is. So, yeah, that's the way I see it right now. Now, having said all that, I do really want to emphasize how important this win was yesterday. That is a game that's going to go down in the record books forever. You've now won 2 straight at Clemson. You've won, what is it, 4 of the last 3 or 4 of the last 7 at Clemson. Now, granted, that's a bit cherry picked, and you were going to play there in 2020 and didn't, so there's a little bit of a time gap and all of that stuff too. But yeah, you really need to just savor that win, savor where this team was and where they have come. As Shane Beamer said yesterday after the game, he told the seniors on defense that this is why they came back to play in that game, to make an impact, and they did. And this is a group that we'll remember forever. I think you got names like Kyle Kennard, Demetrius Knight, these names that showed up for 1 year and made an immediate impact. Joshua Simon, who's been here for 2 years, but made an immediate impact. And then you got all these young guys that you're really excited about. LaNorris Sellers, obviously the very top of that list. Dylan Stewart had a big season, big freshman season. Mazio Bennett flashed. Nick Harbor started to flash. I didn't mention in the seniors, but Raga Sanders, transfer portal, all that. So anyway, all these names are going to be names that are forever etched in the history of this rivalry, the history of the Gamecock program. It's been very few and far between that you had 9 regular season wins around here. You got a chance with whatever bowl you end up in to get 10 for only the 4th or 5th time in school history. I'll put all that into context once we know what is actually happening there. But I think you just gotta. You can be disappointed if you get left out of the playoff, of course, but don't let that make you lose sight of how important this game was, and how we all witnessed, a moment of college football and South Carolina history yesterday. And as far as LaNorris Sellers and Heisman talk and all that, it's probably a little late to start that campaign this year. But you can bet that he's going to be at the top of that watch list for next year. So I don't know. Future's bright. Get you a nice bowl. Get you a big time win over another maybe ranked or big name opponent. And try to carry that momentum into the portal. Try to carry that momentum into ending the 2025 cycle on a high note. We already know, and we learned this yesterday in the postgame too, we already know that South Carolina is being strategic with their depth chart. I think, well, I won't speculate on that, but I will tell you what we learned yesterday. So there was a moment where one of the tackles got injured for a play or two, and instead of putting in Tree Babalade, who would probably be the next up as far as talent goes and all of that, they left him on the sideline and put in I can't even remember who they ended up putting in, but the point being, in the post game, Beamer said that they were trying to hold Tree's red shirt for next year. So there's a moment where you lose a Torricelli, Simpkins, and a Kamar Bell, who contributed as starters on the offensive line this year. But in terms of upside, I think Tree Babalade is going to be one of your best offensive linemen for the next few years. And now you've earned an extra year for him for redshirting. So I do think this is something that they're thinking about. I think that they're being strategic about it. And I do think, even though the defense is going to have to reload big time in the portal, I think you've created a narrative that makes a lot of sense to convince some of those guys to come here. And offensively, I mean, we proved yesterday, even if nothing else is working, LaNorris Sellers can make whatever cliche you want to about turning nothing into something. So let's see if there's anything else I just wanted to hit on real quick from the stats yesterday and all. You actually ended up outgaining Clemson 431 to 419, which surprises me, but that's because you had 267 yards on the ground, 166 of those from LaNorris Sellers himself. Like I said before, you only got one sack on Kate Glubnick yesterday, and neither of them was Cal Kennard or Dylan Stewart. I'm guessing if you don't make the playoffs, Cal Kennard might lock in his first round draft capital or whatever, and maybe sit that out. So he might end up second on the all-time or the season list for all-time sack leader in a season. But Dylan Stewart will probably play, and he's still just two off Clowney's freshman sack record. So that's something to watch for in a potential bowl game or something as well. Oscar Attaway, I thought he had a couple of nice burst runs, 6 carries, 41 yards, long of 21, 6.8 yards per carry. That's encouraging to see. Of course, he's a senior as well. But, good to know that you have that 1-2 punch. Nick Harbor continues to come along, 3 catches, 51 yards, had a long of a 26. I mean, he's really made a lot of strides this year, and I think that's something to look forward to into next year as well. Anyway, we will be back here later this week to talk after the playoff rankings come out on Tuesday night. We'll either hop on Tuesday night or on Wednesday, kind of break down everything that we see, let you know if there's any path from the conference championship games. And yeah, maybe we'll all be delightfully surprised and they'll put South Carolina in over Alabama and Ole Miss on Tuesday, and then we won't even have to worry about anything. That would be something, huh? But yeah, in the meantime, savor the win, talk trash to your neighbors, and we will be back soon. Go check us out on GamecockScoop.com. This weekend only, we got a Black Friday deal. If you use promo code RIVALS24 at checkout, you get 75% off, and that's for a whole year. You lock it in from December 1st to December 1st. And there's a lot of great things coming up in the next few weeks. You got the portal opening. You got the early signing period for 2025 class. And then obviously all this playoff speculation and everything that we've been going on. So make sure you lock in there. In the meantime, this has been the GamecocksGroup.com podcast. We'll see you.